early analysis of their sample, which they analyzed only 100 milligrams of. We had 15 grams to work with ours, and actually we were good boys and girls and didn't even get to 13, and managed to get our goals achieved. Um, and they informed us on what the chemistry we should expect, what the minerals are we should expect, and how to take a deep dive into certain areas that turned out to be very important for findings, as you just talked
Yeah,
about
excellent.
moments ago. Yeah.
Excellent. Now, is it true that every asteroid is the fragment of some larger parent body that got shattered early in the solar system? And I ask that because Bennu, last I checked, is bigger than the Empire State Building, something like 500 meters across. And so that seems like a big enough body to be its own body in the universe. But tell me, turn the clock back on this. Was there some protoplanet that had already sort of, as the geologists say, differentiated its materials and then shattered to become Bennu? And if that's the case, you might be able to find other rocks that are like Bennu that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely great question. First of all, the main type of meteorite we find on Earth that's like Bennu is called a CI-like meteorite, and there's only two handfuls of them in existence. And it's very clear from both studying the sample from Ryugu and the sample from Bennu that our sample collection is biased on Earth. Not only is the sample collection contaminated, but what actually is out in space is biased because we have a lot of carbonaceous asteroids. Now turn the clock backward. Bennu is fragments from collisions that occurred of different bodies together. One of those bodies was a parent body, as we call a previous incarnation of Bennu at a much larger scale. And that was something that was indeed, forming probably some of the early protoplanets that may have existed. And once the objects get to a certain size, around 10 kilometers or so in diameter, the internal mechanism begins to turn on for geologic process. That internal mechanism is heat begins to move around. That's generated from the decay of radioactivity and pressure.
It becomes a cosmic body at that level.
Becomes a cosmic body. It begins to melt the ices that were accreted with it. It begins to have fluid, and we call that the early stages of metamorphism in geology. And the early stages of metamorphosis is that fluid moves through and begins to interact with the minerals that are there. And it begins to change those minerals and pick up different kinds of chemicals as it's moving through the fluid. It moves in different parts of the asteroid because it cracked and all kinds of things that happen. And then what we think happened is that at some point, the poor parent body asteroid gets collided into with something else, and it stops the process. So you have a snapshot in geologic time of that moment, and all the processes geologically were active, stopped.
Wow.
because it's not big enough to sustain it anymore, and it gets frozen in that
It got
state.
knocked up. It got knocked up, and got banged around, and that's it. So
Yeah. So because it's relatively recent, well, recent in my professional life, last several decades, that we came to learn that star systems, like we take the solar system for example, with its 8 planets. Stop. Stop. That if you run the models, that star systems such as ours likely began with like 30 planets or something, or planetesimals, and many of those orbits are just unstable and they collide with each other, and it gets resolved. And so it takes a while for that to sort of shake out and find out who's left in the ring.
You just described the coolest game of billiards ever.
Yeah. Who survived?
Who survived? Survivor billiards.
And don't you even have, there's some asteroids where there look like there are 2 pieces that are stuck together that didn't break apart?
Well, yeah, there are also asteroids that have satellites that go around from collisions, most likely. So
Right.
Even asteroid Bennu, although we don't have a satellite, didn't find a satellite, it was geologically active on the surface, and we had these explosions that pushed material up, which was not cometary-like, but we had looked, going back to the comet discussion, we had looked for cometary action because one of the hypotheses for Bennu before we got there was it could have been an extinct comet core. But it isn't. At least most of us will say it isn't.
Right. It's not a clean boundary between asteroids and comets, right?
No, sir.
Yeah.
It is not.
Yeah.
You know that better now. Yep, it is not.
Yeah. So now when we think of life, I think of, we're carbon based. That's, everybody knows that. And we eat food, and we have crops, and we eat plants and animals. And I always see phosphorus showing up as some key ingredient. And not being a biologist, I've never fully come to appreciate what role that plays. So could you just tell me about phosphorus? I know it's an element on the periodic table. And did you find it in this asteroid sample? And what role does it play in sustaining life as we know it?
Right. So let's go back to, again, the square root of 1, and that phosphorus is, of course, one of the elements on the periodic table, as you said. And the accretion time period of the asteroid, you have all this material accreting, which contains all the different elements that we have on our table, to some extent, not things like hydrogen and helium and stuff. Then as time goes on, minerals start to form through the interaction of water with these rocks that we talked about. And that water is moving through with different, what I call nutrients. In this case, it's not for biological system, but geologic system. And things like sodium, like in sodium chloride, table salt, and chlorine and phosphorus are in this fluid. And then
I love that reference to geologic nutrients. That's a cool thought.
Well, to me, they were alive at one time.
I get okay. Yeah. To you, rocks are alive. That's fine.
Yeah. Don't worry. Give it time. Some influencers on the social media will be pushing geologic nutrients for your health at some point.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I was hard when I was in high school. Let me just say that I was a geek. Anyway. So we so there's a whole sequence that forms of these different minerals, the calcium rich ones, then the phosphorus rich ones, right? And they go down through what's left in the fluid to come out of the fluid and start forming new minerals. You get things like sodium, etc. And phosphorus is one of those key minerals that makes things like phosphates. And of course, phosphorus is one of the key kind of elements that gets bound together with things like carbon and hydrogen, etc., to form prebiotic compounds that are important. And it's the whole suite of these evaporite minerals, not just the phosphate. The phosphorus is critical, though, but it's not just that. It's a whole suite of them that we, as life, have to have in different ways in different proportions. Now, I'm not a biologist, so keep that in mind.
Yeah. So tell me about pre-solar grains. There's a lot of research papers on this. In fact, we have some on display here at the Rose Center for Earth and Space. In fact, they're pre-solar diamonds, I think. And there's some, and I think it's kind of cool. I just don't know its relevance. It's cool to think of grains that might have predated the formation of the solar system, which gets you even farther back than the 4.5 billion years. So I think that's kind of cool. But is it just sort of cool to know, or does it have other relevance to any of this?
Well, I mean, they're saying better than I, we are stardust. We are made up of stardust, right? And stardust means dust that literally comes from stars, either evolving stars or dying stars that eject material. And in that ejection, that gas that comes out, like the fluid with minerals condensing,